Hey everybody, it's Kristen here. I'm hoping you can hear me. I appear to be alone in this meeting for the ID Simulator XAPI cohort meeting, but that's fine. I think what I will do, since there is nobody here right now, is to just sort of go over the idea behind the game. So this is the ID Simulator as we have it right now. So the idea was sort of twofold. Firstly, um, I personally am looking to do a lot more with programming. And so I wanted to see if I could build a game using just programming without any framework. So using, plain Jane JavaScript. And I also wanted to use some of the new skills from a course I just went through. And so the idea is actually to make this game into a progressive web application. So if you don't know what that is, progressive web apps are a way of basically making a web thing one time and having it usable on mobile devices, and more than just responsive design, which you might have heard of. It is actually usable offline, and it's actually built in such a way that it should be offline first. So, if you were to visit and play this game for a little bit offline or online first, then you could also come back to it offline. And the idea is that it would store up, in this case, since we want this game to be XAPI enabled, it would store up your statements that you're making from playing the game. And then as soon as you get back online, it'll send those statements off to the LRS. And I think that's really interesting functionality for a lot of the things that we make, is to be able to allow people to access them offline, but still have all of the functionality that we want. Now, I started off this game actually with code and with a prototype even before the cohort started, mostly because I wanted to make sure that I could do what I thought I could do just with ES6. And so this is where we are. I've already had several really great contributions. We now are using Webpack, and Webpack was important for the project. It's a tool that helps us to make sure that we can use different technologies inside of the project. And we've also had people to help us make these stats, so to speak, work. So one of the important things that I wanted to go over today was we got some really great feedback from Schult Ola. It's one of my ID heroes. And one of the things that he talked about was the game as it is right now. We're in MVP mode. So this is just us going through the beginning. He said he totally understood the point of the game. But then once he got to here, once we're actually, doing the whole yes, no portion, the actual gameplay, he couldn't see that the stats were updating. Like, that was not clear to him, and it wasn't clear sort of how your decisions actually affected your life. And as you can see, we actually still have some bugs in the game right now as well. So we need to fix those. But as far as gameplay, what we really need to concentrate on, I think, is making sure that the scenarios that we have built in um, make it clear what your choices are, like the consequences of your choices. And we also have sort of a win state and a lose state. And one of the things that Schult suggested was possibly that, if we're doing something like this and we say yes, well, obviously our money stat should go up because we'll get paid for that. But this stat, which is supposed to be our sort of your happiness as an ID, would maybe go down for something like this, since there's not necessarily any sort of good instructional design built into this. So maybe that makes you frustrated. And so maybe part of the game is that you want to get your money up, but you also have to sort of stay alive and not depressed. This was also supposed to be an influence stat. So the idea would be that some of the projects that you do should be so good, or some of the things that you do. One of the sort of things that we have in the MVP is uh, starting a blog. That's one option that you can choose to do, and that should raise your profile, so to speak. And again, these unfortunately, we have some bugs in the game right now, so these stats are just kind of going all over the place. So we'll fix that. I actually forgot what this stat is, which is kind of nuts. So that's probably something else that we need to fix, is make sure that these stats are, it's really clear what they are. They might even need to just have text labels. And then we also need to make sure that it's clear when you are sort of deciding what the consequences are. So I'd like to get some input on that from the group. Sort of how do we improve the gameplay? I feel like a big part of it is probably going to be improving these scenarios and then figuring out what stats the scenario should change. And then also, maybe just going back to the drawing board on the stats. Probably money and your happiness are probably still good. These two, I'm not so sure about, so we should definitely talk about that. And then the other thing, you'll see this picture here. Reigns is actually one of the games that was my inspiration for this game, and they have a really neat interface where you do a Tinder sort of swipe left or right to make your decision. But if you just sort of hold that position, you'll see that they actually show you the impact of your decision with these little dots. And that was all actually, if you were to play a Reigns game, I found that actually really intuitive. So that's, part of this is going to be UI, but part of it is definitely mechanics and logic. So this is actually the thread here. I encourage everybody to read this because we do want the game to have really solid gameplay. The other thing that's going to be really important, I feel like, is making sure that we keep the game accessible. So while I really like the game's Reigns UI, where you sort of swipe back and forth, and maybe we add that anyway, but I like, I had buttons here because these are obviously keyboard accessible. And I've also actually even just made, so I'm not clicking on anything, I'm actually just using my keyboard keys. Y for yes, N for no, and then space for continue. Wow, yeah, need to fix that. And so I want to make sure that the game is as accessible as we can make it as well. So those are things that we need to be thinking about as a project team. How do we make the gameplay sort of better and more intuitive? How do we make sure that the scenarios that we're sort of giving people tie into sorry, that was my dog, tie into these metrics really well, and make sure that people can really see the consequences of their actions, choosing yes and no to something like this. Can you turn this PowerPoint into an e-learning course? How do we make sure that choosing yes is a reasonable consequence, choosing no is a reasonable consequence, and that it makes the gameplay engaging and fun. The other thing that I wanted to do was actually point to my other source of inspiration, Sort the Court, which is a game that is on itch.io. I love this game, and it's loading right now. Just go ahead and start a new game. So this game is one of my big inspirations. Like I said, I love this game just because the mechanic is so simple. And that's really what I've tried to replicate in the ID simulator. Basically, you're just saying yes and no to a series of pseudo-random propositions that are given to you. Some of them are actually puzzles, in a sense, that they have sort of long-term consequences, or you have to do a number of steps in order to get the reward that you're trying to go for. But essentially all you're doing is just saying yes and no to things. And I love how simple and yet how impactful that is. And Reigns is actually very much the same. You're basically just saying yes or no to the scenarios that are given to you. Now, they actually make it very clear what is happening here. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to show this game. I figured it would be a little bit easier for me to show than Reigns. But essentially, these are their stats. So this is the number of people that you have in your kingdom. This is the happiness in your kingdom. And this is sort of your personal stash of gold. And basically, you're just saying yes and no to things. But I have found that it's super easy to spend hours on this. And some of these scenarios are random. So that one, sometimes that spell is good, gives you lots of money, and sometimes, as you can see, it actually kills people. And then out here in the background, the other thing that's really interesting is that as your population grows, your city will actually grow back here. So that's another way that they're signaling your success in this game. I wanted to keep it more on the Reign side with the simplicity of the UI, just because that'll allow us to make a game a little bit faster and use less art. But this is also really awesome. And at the end of each day, they give you a sort of an overview or a review of what your decisions have done to the kingdom. The other thing that I wanted to point out here is that, you know, some of these, or a lot of these, I would even say, are actually just, you know, kind of silly situations. And one of the things that I think we can do with the ID simulator is make it a little tongue in cheek. So you see that's the same scenario, but we got a different random result. And make it a little bit funny. It doesn't have to be all work. So I was thinking, you know, less simulation, right? We're not really trying to be super realistic, more simulator in the sense of some of the other games you might have seen that are like, you know, called X Simulator or Y Simulator, and they're really just poking fun a little bit. So anyway, that's that game. That's a really amazing game. It's called Sort the Court. It's on itch.io. I would highly recommend that you play it just for your own amusement. But it's one of the big influences in creating ID Simulator. So if anyone is interested in helping, the game really needs help, I think, writing these scenarios, writing fun scenarios, writing tongue-in-cheek scenarios. We need to think about the stats. Do these stats still make sense? And we need to think about how do we tie these yes-no decisions to these stats in a way that makes it clear to the player what's going on, so that they don't feel like they're just getting random rewards. They feel like, okay, yes, my decisions are directly affecting this, and that affects my gameplay. So that is, I'm checking Slack again. Nope, nothing's there. So again, to really see all of Schultz's comments, see if I can find this. There you go. There it is. Okay, so I'll go, I'll pin this. So right in here, hopefully everybody should see it. It's in a thread. This is Jolt's feedback. We need to read this and figure out how we can fix the issues There are also, as you saw, some technical issues, so we need to look again at the programming that's happening and figure out how we fix these stats. And we also need to look at accessibility. How do we make sure that this game is accessible? So like I said, the buttons are already pretty good, but probably the biggest thing is like when these things update, we need to update the user. When the scenario updates, we need to update the user and make sure that they can tell that a change has happened on the page, because there's no reloading happening. So we need to make sure that people who are maybe using screen readers can be notified that there has been an update on the page. The other things that we should be thinking about first and foremost is XAPI statements. Obviously, this is meant to be an XAPI enabled game, and so we need to figure out where do we need to be capturing statements, what exactly do we need to capture. We need to make up the structure of those statements. Let's see. Stuart actually suggested that we use a spreadsheet. I don't know if he will sort of be able to give us a blank template for that, but that we use a spreadsheet to sort of think about the structure of the statements. So that is something that we could definitely use help with. And then just sort of going further, if there's anybody who is really interested in sort of art or sound, I'm sure this game could use some sound effects. That also would be an accessibility feature to help signal you chose yes or you chose no. And probably some music wouldn't be a bad idea. And you know, I am making these avatars based on some art that I purchased, basically avatar creators. And if anybody wants to do anything hand-drawn, totally open to that as well. Right now, I feel like we have like 20 or so characters at our disposal. And so I'm personally mostly interested in making sure that the gameplay works and that we are generating statements. But if anybody is interested in art or sound, it'd be great to have you on the team as well. All right, so that is about it since I'm still alone in the Hangout. Hoping to get other teammates on board. Anybody who wants to contribute, we're open to it. Even if you're like, hey, let's sort of change the direction of the game. You know, we're at a really early stage, so that's totally fine. The reason why I created a prototype, like I said, was firstly just to make sure that I could do what I thought I could do. It's partly a programming challenge for me personally. And the other thing is that I found that it's sometimes easier, particularly as a newbie, to have a project that already sort of has a vision and add on to it, as opposed to trying to just come up with something out of thin air. But like I said, totally open to rethinking the gameplay and even the game itself. So that's it for today. Hopefully this meeting has been recorded, or this presentation, I should say. I haven't actually met with anyone, but hoping to get some feedback in the Slack channel. That is Team ID Simulator. And hoping to see you all next week.